going to hell. Yo, what's up? Someone that's no one. Welcome back to another banger. Let's go! Sent in by Lizzie N. Trip report on 4-ACO DMT, 20 milligrams, with some cannabis and CBD. And here's the full report details. Alright, here we are with another 4-ACO DMT trip report. This one, I really like it myself, but if you haven't heard of it, it's a psychedelic research chemical with very similar effects to shrooms. So similar in fact, some say the experience is pretty much the same. If you look at the metabolism of it, both will break down to psilocin, the active psychedelic component. And with how many times I tripped on this personally, I mean it's probably been like 10 to 20 times, we should definitely have a lot more on this substance. I'll get into my own story shortly. But today, Lizzie has an interesting report where cannabis had a strong impact on her trip, where it makes things somewhat intense, especially visually. So with that, I'm sure you'll enjoy this one. Without further ado, let's dive right into this. Hi, I've got a trip report if you'd be interested. My dose was 20 milligrams of 4-ACO DMT. The time I tripped on it before this, I'd taken 20 milligrams, then 20 more an hour in. It was very intense, but it did smooth the come up by staggering it a bit. I wanted to do this again. I took 20 milligrams, and sure enough, I was barely having visuals. But for whatever reason, I hesitated to take another 20. I didn't feel a calling to do it, so I didn't. This should have been my sign to call it a bust and listen to music or something. Instead, I decided to smoke some weed, since it's known for increasing the effects of psychedelics. I had little experience with weed, mostly just psychedelics. I never combined the two before. I smoked a bowl, and while I felt the weed, the increased effects of the 4-ACO was delayed. I can definitely see an improvement in visuals, the usual breathing, and gentle pulsing of surfaces. Colors becoming more vivid. Weed makes me stupid. The 4-ACO can be a bit confusing, so somehow I completely forgot the confusion and weirdness that too much weed brings on. I was only focused on the increased visuals. I smoked more. The visuals were getting insane. The grass and leaves on the ground would move around my feet like water, and everything looked like this really gaudy acrylic painting, like one of those old paintings you might see of a farm. There was Aztec geometry painted on our fence, not just translucent shapes, but fully overlapped, pure black and white patterns. The weed gave it a completely different headspace too. It felt so bizarre, in a way I can't quite explain, but that anyone who smoked too much can absolutely understand. I just wanted to see more visuals. I was really stupid and already out of it at this point. I started smoking a third bowl, and then paused and remembered how I get when I smoke too much weed. I was just standing there in the yard, my pipe fizzling out with about half a bowl left, and I just had that frozen expression, that sinking feeling of knowing you really screwed up. It felt like I'd been caught hiding a body. For a few minutes, it was weird but fascinating. I wandered around in circles, just looking at patterns for a few minutes. The confusion set in more and more, and the visuals, on delay, were kicking in even more, and still ramping up until I would see things overlaying my vision. I get closed-eye visuals that would sort of jump between my head and overlaying my vision. It very much had the 4-ACO visuals, but the cannabis added this really delirious, delusional aspect to the hallucinations. At first, I was calm. I was focusing on the visuals. It was overwhelming and confusing, but interesting. After I reached the highest possible intensity, it went beyond that, and that's when I quickly spiraled into terror and insanity. I help run the Discord server for my local psychedelic group. Sometimes we pop in there while tripping, just for moral support, and it's helped me a ton before. I got talking to someone. This is so bizarre. I don't think it's bad. Actually, I can't tell. This is really overwhelming. How much did you smoke? I think around 3 bowls. Wow, take it easy. That sounds like a bit much. Are you gonna be alright? Everyone was acting really concerned for me because they knew I have a low tolerance for weed. I'm not a heavy smoker. I put my phone in my pocket and completely forgot. The visuals were unending. It wasn't even the intensity of the visuals, but it was the speed of it all. It was this seamless blending. It was just everywhere. I'd look at something, look away, and look back only for it to be completely different or in another place. I was seeing these angry Easter Island heads in the grass. If you've ever seen that head from the Spangle album, I was seeing that in a lot of places as well. But they didn't look cool. They all looked sinister. I was seeing faces everywhere, and they looked like they were laughing at my suffering. It felt like I was being punished for not respecting the substance. Oh, you wanted more visuals? Just for fun? Because what we gave you wasn't good enough? Here, have more visuals. The tree branches, naked from the winter, look like claws. Sometimes I'd see full-blown hallucinations in the corner of my eye, then look and realize it wasn't there. We have a grow that we don't use in the backyard, and it's rusted. For some reason, there was a large brown piece of paper on it. Out of the corner of my eye, it looked like a cat that had been impaled on a rusty metal spike, dismembered and bloody. Then when I looked, it was just the paper. Out of the corner of my eye, I looked up at the sky. There wasn't anything in the sky, so why would I see anything bad? That would help, to just focus on the sky and breathe. The clouds had faces. They were demonic and laughing at me. I would run inside. My bedroom connects to the fenced-in backyard via a sliding glass door. My bedroom was sinister too. The walls had these veins/arteries that were pumping and breathing. There were shadows through my curtain, cast by a tree outside, and that looked like shadow people grabbing at me from the other side of the window. I'm so glad I didn't notice the mirror. Closing kept the faces around, but now they were machinescapes of gore, straight out of an H.R. Giger drawing. When I have a hard time tripping, I put on music and take deep breaths. This has helped me through every negative part of a trip. As unpopular of an opinion as it might be, a bad weed trip can be so much worse than a bad shroom trip. On the latter, you can remind yourself not to fight it, at least to some degree, that as long as you go with the right mindset. Too much weed just removes you from any rational thought. Hundreds of nonsensical thoughts, none of which you can remember, concocting themselves into an ocean of paranoia. Death by 1,000 cuts. You can't dig yourself out of it. I had music going on this whole time. Literally any sound was better than no sound. Silence freaks me out when I'm nervous. But at the same time, it took on this super creepy tone. I had music from Alice in Wonderland going, and I left the music on loop because the buttons and text on my phone was too distorted for me to change the music. Still, with the headspace I was in, it only contributed to the narrative of being trapped in some kind of personal hell. The hairs on my arm would turn red like blood, or move around. I tried washing my aquarium. That helps me calm down. The coral had this horrifying alien face, with bleeding eyes, and all kinds of stuff I don't know how to describe blending into trundles and polyps on it. My clownfish looked like he was dying, his eyes red and sickly. I could hear banging. In retrospect, I knew it was my roommate, probably doing their woodworking downstairs. If I'd come out and explained the situation, I'm sure they'd let me sit with them. But I reeked of weed so badly. I didn't want them to smell me. I was scared they'd be angry at me. I was scared to change my clothes so I didn't smell, because if I was naked, I didn't know what would happen to me. Being naked makes me feel scared and vulnerable. I was laying on my bed staring at the wall sobbing, while demonic, alien faces of all forms overlay my vision, laughing hysterically at me. I'd close my eyes, and they'd still be there. I was seeing terrifying shit, and I was just focusing on not running outside screaming. I kept moving between the backyard and my room, thinking the grass was always greener. I was listening to advice videos regarding the topic. One was psych substances video for people having bad trips. The other was some guy talking about how to calm down a bad weed trip. I always have a pitcher of water in my room when I trip. I listened to the latter video on loop, just to hear a voice. He said to drink water. So I drank a whole pitcher of water and almost threw it up from drinking too fast. I remembered my phone and started frantically posting on Discord, begging for help, just barely managing to do it by using the voice to text on my keyboard. Even though I'm normally terrified of talking to new people over the phone/video chat, even Ted Bundy would have calmed me down at this point, just from being around another person. The person I talked to was so helpful. I'd also smoked a huge amount of CBD, just bowl after bowl after bowl. That helped a bit. I was having terrifying visuals, still, but I was able to focus on his voice. Even though he thought it would make things worse, him telling me about his own bad trips helped me calm down. He had the same kind of bad trip as me, except he ended up in the hospital. Eventually, while the visuals were strong, they had calmed me down so that they weren't sinister or overwhelming, or at least they felt less real. I didn't feel like the creatures were after me or laughing at my terror. It just felt like the end of a normal trip. He let me go after I was at a manageable level, and I told him how much he meant to me, a person who barely knew me helping me through such a horrible experience. I watched Bob Burgers for a while, which is a comfort show for me. The strangest part was that after the trip, I somehow felt an afterglow. I felt amazing, aside from the weed nausea. I slept totally fine that night, no lingering paranoia or visuals. Somehow, I'm not traumatized from the trip. I definitely took a much needed break, and I'd eventually like to get over my fear of tripping again. I think ultimately, this was my fault. I went in without intentions. I wasn't satisfied when it didn't give me what I wanted. When I tried to force it, it punished me. Perhaps much too harshly, but it was of my own doing nonetheless. I also took precautions. I'm glad that I locked up my car keys and sharp objects. I'm glad I put CBD out in case something like this happened.